I opened each one of those bottles and I poured in a little whiskey, and then I poured in a little bourbon, and I poured in a little vodka, and I poured in a little rum, and I filled that big Listerine about half full, and I started drinking it. I drank this concoction, and I just drank, and I got sick, and yet the very next weekend I was thinking, wow, let's maybe we should get some beer. My preference was not what I drank, is just to get drunk. My goal was to get drunk and to do whatever I wanted to do. And then after a while, I discovered LSD and later cocaine. So I was trying to tear the back door off this cocaine dealer's home, and I looked up and he's pointing a 45 at me. I just had never put it together, Eric. I had never put together that God could fix what I couldn't. But he had a condition.
Have you ever taken time to look back over your life and evaluate some of the decisions that you've made? Have you ever looked at some of the circumstances of your life and examined how those events impacted you, leading you down one path or another? Have some of your decisions impacted others in a negative way? Have you ever had an emptiness that you tried to fill with substances or unhealthy living? Proverbs 14:12 says, "There is a way that appears to be right, but in the end it leads to death." Does that verse describe your past? Sometimes it's good for me to stop, look at my life, and make a change. But how do I do that? And what's the first step? Can God pull me out of this gaping hole that I dug for myself? And can God bring meaning to all my pain? Lamentations 3:40 says, "Let us examine our ways and test them, and let us return to the Lord." Today, our guest describes some of the twists and turns of his life that eventually led him to change. He has an amazing story, and I can't wait for you to hear it. I'm Eric Hutchinson, and this is the If Nothing Changes podcast. So, hey, new friend, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, I'm really glad to be here with you today. My name is Kent Whitaker, and I am a grateful disciple of Jesus Christ. I'm celebrating recovery from drug and alcohol addiction.
So, hey, Kent, welcome to the podcast. And I always start at the very beginning. And so, because sometimes we have listeners that are from your area and where you grew up. So, why don't you tell us where you were born and tell us a little bit about your family of origin?
I'd be glad to, yeah. Well, actually, I was born outside of Chicago, Illinois, and I lived there only a short while. My mother had studied to be a nurse there at the Swedish Covenant Hospital, and she and my father met on a train. He was coming out of the World War II from the Navy, and they fell in love. They got married, had a baby, which was me, and I lived there, I guess, about a year. We moved to Frankfort, Kentucky. And then when I was about 4 years old, relocated up to North Dakota. And North Dakota was where my mother grew up. And we lived there just a short while. It was probably about a year. And then my dad, who had hoped to be able to work with Grandpa Conrad, who was this, set in his ways Norwegian farmer guy, and that didn't work. So anyway, my dad got some jobs, and he was wanting to be a home builder. So he had found himself some work down in Mandan, North Dakota, building homes for another builder there. And so we moved to Mandan, North Dakota, and that's basically where I would stay in that area. However, when I was, I guess, through third grade, I stayed in Mandan, North Dakota. Then we moved across the river. The Missouri River separates Mandan and Bismarck, North Dakota. I don't know if you've been to Bismarck, but it's right in the middle of the state. It's capital. And we moved there after third grade. And so fourth grade through graduating high school, I lived there in Bismarck, North Dakota.
Wow. So that you did quite a bit of moving before you got to high school age. So that's pretty amazing, from Chicago to Kentucky to North Dakota. Did you have any siblings? I didn't hear you mention that earlier. Did
Well,
you?
yeah, I did. Yeah, I had I was the oldest, and then I had 5 years later I had a sister, and then 10 years later had a brother. 12 years later had another brother. So I had three siblings. Mhm.
So, what was it like growing up in your household? You didn't mention anything about your mom and dad splitting up or anything, so I'm assuming that they stayed
No, I grew
together.
up in a great household. I had a wonderful mom and dad. They were just salt of the earth, and they raised us Christian, and I accepted the Lord my whole life. I don't ever remember a time when I didn't know that Jesus is God and had come, born of a virgin, died on a cross, rose from the dead, and is coming back. I've always believed that in my heart. So I grew up in a family that was not just talking about being Christians, but actually they lived their lives as Christians. They were very loyal to each other. They treated us kids wonderful. The family was very important to them. In any event, yeah, I grew up in a really great home. I'm not one of those that came out of a home where my mom and dad were alcoholic or abusive or cheating on each other. That just never happened. They were high on integrity, just hardworking, like I say, salt of the earth, Christian mom and dad. I was telling you that my dad became a home builder. So there in Bismarck, he had risen to the top. He was the sought after builder to build homes for doctors and people that had the dough to do it. And when I was in sixth grade, which would have been right about 1960, he had contracted with five different families that were fairly well-off families and to build new homes for them in one of the nicest neighborhoods. In fact, it was a neighborhood that him and my mother were building a home for our family at the same time. So unfortunately, my dad was a great carpenter, but he was not a great businessman. He came out of that era where you'd agree to do something, you'd shake hands on it, and that was it. That was your word. Your word was your bond. Unfortunately, he had shaken hands with guys that agreed to pay for a lot of changes and upgrades and stuff while the homes were being built, who later on decided that they didn't have to pay him. And they knew one another, and so they all decided, well, let's all go together and say that he's lying. And so they ruined my dad's business. We actually went to court. I believe that there was um, some nefarious things that happened there as well. But in any event, my dad had built had built a really incredible crew of men who he trained and like I say, a great reputation. And I had enjoyed that. I had, as a child growing up, you get to about sixth grade, and you're kind of starting to feel that your independence and establish yourself as a young man. And I had been accepted by all of the cool kids, if you will, in the community, and had been by the time I got into seventh grade, was starting to get invited to the cool parties. And then all of this came crashing down. They went to court. They decided against my dad. My dad lost his business, and it was talked about how he was the one that had done something wrong. So his not only his business, but his reputation, and along with that, our whole family. So I realized how it had a bad effect on them, but I didn't realize until just here, probably within the last 5 years, that this had set in motion a change in my life. I up until then was a pretty good kid, and then about this period of time, and I didn't realize the impact of the attitudes of the other kids who probably heard their parents or their parents had said something about me and my dad. I didn't realize how that affected me until just here within the last few years. But I see that as a pivotal, moment in my life. You're talking about a monument and things that happen in our lives, and that was really where it changed the whole direction of our family. And my dad uh, rebounded. he got a insurance license and started selling insurance. He became the number one insurance agent for the company he worked for in North Dakota, and and then he was sought after here in Portland by the same company and transferred out here in 1967. But for for those years coming into junior high and high school, I went a different direction. And so that's kind of where my story began. And I started messing around with my girlfriend, uh, and I started drinking. And by sophomore year, I was drinking, and I I became a different person. I became very uh, hard. I became very angry, and I didn't know why at the time, but I do now.
So was it alcohol or marijuana or both, or what was it? Was your kind of your substance of choice?
Beer. There's no marijuana back then. There was no marijuana that I knew of. I mean, I'm sure there was somewhere, but I was when I was in high school, no, and I didn't get into marijuana until I moved to Portland. Now that was a whole different deal. When I moved out here in 1967, I graduated from high school in Bismarck, 66. I went to a year or not a whole year, but I guess it was a term at the University of North Dakota where was really something I did a lot. In fact, I joined a fraternity because they had major drinking keggers and stuff. So I was a beer drinker, but I also drank hard liquor. So that was my preference. My preference was not what I drank, is just to get drunk. My goal was to get drunk and to do whatever I wanted to do. And I made a choice, and it wasn't to get along and to be part of the cool kids or the ones that were accepted. I kind of rejected them actually.
So do you remember the first time that you got drunk?
Oh yeah, I do. My dad, who never drank, when he got into insurance, they had a New Year's Eve party, and my dad had bought a bottle of whiskey and a bottle of rum and a bottle of vodka and a bottle of bourbon and a bottle of, he had like about six or seven fifths of different, hard liquors. And he made a mistake. He cracked each one of them. He opened each one of them. And he had them sitting in the kitchen. I remember to this day. He had them all set up, and they had invited the crew from his insurance office over to have a party. So while he was in getting shaving or whatever, getting his tie on, I had gone in the bathroom and I found a big Listerine bottle, a big one. It just had a little Listerine in. I poured that out, rinsed it out. Then I went out and while he wasn't there, he was in the bedroom. I opened each one of those bottles and I poured in a little whiskey, and then I poured in a little bourbon, and I poured in a little vodka, and I poured in a little rum, and I filled that big Listerine about half full, and then I'd replace what I poured out of the fifths with water and put the cap back on, and I started drinking it. I drank this concoction, and I got just, they got names for it, but falling down drunk.
So,
Yeah,
I want to ask you this question because I usually ask
yeah,
this of addicts and especially alcoholics, because
yeah,
some people believe that, an alcoholic, once they take that first drink, they're done for, they're an addict. And then I've had some, it's more of a process that they drink, and it's more of a social thing at first, and then it
hmm
becomes a medication, or it becomes a
yeah,
habit. So for you, were you hooked from the beginning, or was it more of a
yeah. It's
slower
all of
process?
that. It's both. It's both. I'm a person now that understands, and I've been around this for a long time, both as a alcoholic addict and as a recovering alcoholic addict. it's kind of like being a diabetic. And you know how, you don't decide to become a diabetic. I don't know what exactly determines whether or not a person ends up being a diabetic. Well, see, alcoholism is the same thing. And a diabetic doesn't wake up one morning and say, you know what, I'm sick of being a diabetic, so I'm done with it. I'm just not going to be a diabetic anymore. Neither does an alcoholic. A lot of people don't understand if you're not an alcoholic, it's just like if you're not a diabetic, you don't understand, what that really means. But an alcoholic is an alcoholic. And it's both once you start drinking, just like I did, and I just drank and I got sick and yet the very next weekend I was thinking, wow, maybe we should get some beer. And my my drinking was always to get drunk. And that's a real clear sign. Not that you like the taste of it or you drink, a beer or two. No, you drink, I drank to get drunk. And that's what I did from the very beginning. As you go along, though, it is a progression. And it does involve drinking more inappropriately. And then for me, it involved getting into drugs as well. When I moved out here to Portland is when that started. And I'm a very smart guy, you know. I really am. I was blessed. God blessed me with a good brain. I'm a very cagey. I became a very great manipulator. Good alcoholics are really good con people. They can lie to you, and even though you may think that you know something, and they convince you don't know it. So no, I became very good at hiding it, and so yeah, that's the way it was. I think my mom, caught me at one point, and I became very hostile to her, and I remember that happened once. And but yeah, no, and then like I say, I graduated high school. I went away to college, and that's more and at college, instead of going to classes and stuff, I was ending up hungover and sleeping in, missing classes. So I flunked out of my first year of college, or my first semester of college. I flunked, and then I moved out here to Portland. When I came to Portland, I would continue, and my parents had high hopes that I could go to college and get a degree, and they didn't have any idea how messed up I was until I came out here. And I remember, there were times where we'd end up talking to therapists or psychiatrists. And so they knew by the time I got here that I had some problems for sure. And obviously I messed up the first stint there at the University of North Dakota. But when I came out here to Portland, I actually started at community college, flunked out of that. I ended up down at the University of Oregon. Go Ducks, I ended up down there. I flunked out down there. And it was always because of, using drugs or drinking and just not showing up for class, not doing what I was supposed to do. Now, when I did, I'd get A's and B's. When I would start, I'd get put it all together, and I'd think I'm going to do it this time. But then I'd allow myself to drink, or I'd allow myself to chase girls. I was really, I was into chasing the parties, chasing the girls, kind of living the life of a playboy, or whatever you call it. I didn't have any money, so it was not like I was able to do too awfully much in that area. But I was not a nice person. I became a very hard, uncaring sort of a person. Yeah, but like I say, once I got here to Portland, I discovered marijuana, and then after a while, I discovered LSD, and later cocaine. All was marijuana, and so it was a combination of drinking and using drugs.
I haven't heard you say anything about God or religion. So,
Mhm.
was that a shift as well? Your parents stopped going to church. What did you believe about God, or did you even give him a second thought at that point?
I always believed in God, and I always counted on God to save me from my, when things would, uh, get really tough, I was hoping God would step in and save me so it wouldn't, so I wouldn't end up dead or something. I was kind of well, I wasn't kind of, I was a real wild person. And I love to drive cars, and a lot of times I drove very fast. I was a very uh, crazy driver, and God always had mercy on me. I can't say it enough. God had mercy on me over and over and over. No, I always believed in God. I'd go to church. My parents continued once they moved out here. They would go to church. They were um, pretty, yeah, they were constant in going to church. I didn't attend as much as I did when I was younger. Occasionally I would go with them, like to a Christmas service or something. Hmm. I never spent any time in the Bible, but at the same time, I was part of a family, and I never lost contact with my family. In fact, lived very with them or close to them always. And we'd always celebrate birthdays together, Thanksgiving together, Christmas, and my mom pretty much made that happen. And so we'd all get together, and I'd of course be high and hiding it, best I could and stuff. So, but yeah, I ended up wrecking cars, wrecking relationships. I was a mess. Hmm.
So, were you an angry drunk?
Not many people that would want to, get into it with me. And I was at the same time, I didn't go around starting fights, but I did carry a knife, and eventually I'd carry a loaded revolver, and I would drive around the Portland area. I'd have a half drank pint of Jack Daniels under my driver's seat and a loaded revolver. I hung out with guys that would just as soon, some of them would just soon kill me. I hung out with drug dealers and criminals, and that was kind of, I always tell the story in my testimony. I showed up at a cocaine dealer's home, 3 a.m. in the morning. I was drunk, and I thought because the lights were off, my addled mind said, well, nobody was home, so I was trying to tear the back door off this cocaine dealer's home, and I looked up and he's pointing a 45 at me. And he would have shot me, but he would have ended up having to talk to the police and stuff. So he didn't want to do that. So, but God always had mercy on me.
So, now was this during college years or was this after?
It was during my 20s, yeah, it was during my 20s. I was attending Portland State University. This was after the University of Oregon, flunking out there and flunking out of Portland Community College here. And then I started at Portland State, which is downtown Portland. And there was a one day, I don't know what class it was for, there was a final exam being held. And I showed up that morning, and I had started drinking early, and I was too drunk to find the room that it was being held in. So I flunked out, and I wouldn't go back to college after that. After that I went to work with my dad. My dad at that time he had dropped out of his insurance thing here, and it worked for him well in North Dakota, but out here it was a different culture. These are different people here in the Portland area, Oregon, than what he was used to in North Dakota. North Dakota, it worked well. Out here, it didn't work. And my dad wasn't healthy, but he went back to what he knew, which was remodeling. He went around, he got a job, and he enlisted me to help him. So I started I started helping my dad do remodels, and in fact, we did that for many years.
You haven't mentioned any dating relationships or serious. Did you have any serious
Mhm.
relationships with girls during this time, or I mean,
I had a couple of different girlfriends, and but I was always looking for girls, and I had a lot of what would you call one night stands. And I don't, I remember along the way, I remember some of the gals, their names, and a lot of them I don't, frankly. Sorry to say. Like I say, I wasn't a very nice person. And but I thought I could keep doing what I was doing and somehow it would all work out. But if, obviously, of course, that wasn't to be. Alcoholism is a progressive illness, and so things kept getting worse and worse, which brought me up to 1983. I was at my bottom. I was living with a gal and who I would end up marrying. But 1983, I my my beautiful family, my mom and my sister. I had a five sister who was 5 years younger than me. They they had seen how I was getting more and more unable to maintain the cover. And in fact, that Christmas I hadn't shown up for the Christmas family Christmas get together. And I'd never miss that. I always show up with presents and get presents and celebrate. That Christmas I hadn't because I was too sick. I was too sick. I was just too messed up. And so they got a hold of me in March and they said, "Hey, we want to know if you can come down. We found a counselor we want you to talk to. Somebody might thinks that maybe he can help you." And because I felt guilty about things, I agreed to go see this counselor downtown Portland. So I showed up for appointment. I thought I'd sit down with a counselor, and I thought, oh, it'll just be another waste of time, but I'll do it because my trying to make my mom and sister feel better. And here I walk into a room that was full of my family, this girl that I had been um, dating, who really cared for me, and I was just treating her like I treated everybody else, and she was sitting there with her daughter, and anyway, they intervened me in March 1983. And I said, okay, yeah, well, let me think about it. No, no, we got a room for you. We got a bed for you just down the street. They're waiting for you, and you need to make a decision. And of course, people are crying. People are expressing how I've hurt them, and I'm just going, oh my gosh. And part of me, the old me, which I know now is the old me, said, you got to get out of this. You got to. So I said, well, I got to go home and get some clothes. No, no, we got all your stuff. And whatever we don't have, we'll bring you. So I didn't have any excuse. And they literally said, we'll walk you. It's 2 blocks away. It was 2 blocks downtown Portland from this man's office to a Portland treatment center. That was the name. I don't think it's there anymore, and I checked in for a 30-day program, which used AA, the Alcoholics Anonymous program. And God had prepared me. I was at my bottom. I had run out of options, and I realized that I was really in a bad place. And I realize now that He was always with me, all the way from my childhood. I was always kind of looking for that someday when everything would get straightened out and everything would be cool. I became willing. I call it willingness step zero in the 12-step program. Willingness is step zero. And I started reading the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I came to this part. It says selfishness. I realized there was a solution to this. And I didn't think there was a solution. I thought I'm a drunk. That's what I'm going to be. I'm going to be a drunk, and I'll just try to get through it. But I found out in that treatment center that there was a solution, and it involved me, amazingly. And it says selfishness, self-centeredness that we think is the root of our troubles. He says, so our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making, and they arise out of ourself, and the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. Above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us, and God makes that possible. We had to have God's help. So like I say, I believed in God. I knew that God existed. I just had never put it together, Eric. I had never put together that God could fix what I couldn't until I sat there in that treatment center and God showed me that he could fix what I couldn't. But he had a condition. He made it real apparent to me through this period of time, this month. that I had a part to play in this, and that I had to do my part in order for him to do his part. And I said, well, God, what is my part? And he said, well, can you go to a meeting? I go, yeah, I can go to a meeting. He said, well, I want you to go to meetings and work this program, this recovery program. And I'm going to put this program in front of you. And as I put it in front of you, you do it, the things you can do, and then I'll take care of the things you can't do. I said, okay, sounds good. But you got to quit doing things your way and start doing things my way, is basically what he was saying to me. Well, that makes sense to everybody who's a Christian, okay. But I had never really, truly accepted that or understood that until then. Well, I left that treatment center on April 16th, 1983. I walked out the door. I walked back onto the streets that I'd run wild on for many, many years. I walked back into the world, so to speak, that I was trying to be successful in, continuing to do what I had been doing. I walked out onto the streets, April 16th, 1983. I've been clean and sober ever since.
Wow. That's an
That's
amazing sobriety.
it's over 41 years.
Wow.
And Eric, I used to wake up in the middle of the night and have a drink or have something to smoke. I was stoned every day. I was drunk, stoned all the time. It wasn't a matter of whether I was. It was just, how high on what. But anyway, I've been sober now. Today, I think it's 15,280 days, one day
Wow.
at a time,
Wow.
and working this program. I came into AA meetings back then. I started in AA, and I still attend the same meeting that I established as my home group here in Tigard. I still attend that every week. I hand out chips, recognition chips there, and help set it up and tear it down. But I only go to one AA meeting, but I go to many Celebrate Recoveries because I found Celebrate Recovery in 2005. And I had mentioned that I'd been living with this girl, and I ended up marrying her in 1984. And she was a very messed up girl. We had 3 children. So I have 2 sons and a daughter, and from that marriage. And she was an abusive sort of a woman, and she became more and more that way. We tried to get help for I tried to get help for her, and she wasn't good at doing what she was supposed to do. Anyway, so she left the family after 18 years, and I ended
18.
up a single father in 2002.
Wow.
And then in 2004, we were divorced. She had filed for divorce, and I couldn't reconcile with her. She wouldn't reconcile with me. I tried, but
Yeah.
because I felt, I felt that marriage is a vow for life. I took it real serious. I say I've had the faith that God has given me, and but by then she had been with other men and everything, and she was refusing, and so I went ahead and divorced her, and that was that. And I raised my children from that point on. And so that was at that point, like I say, 2004, where I kind of gotten away from AA on a regular basis attending, but now I was in a new situation with a new bunch of things that I had to deal with, and that's when God brought me into Celebrate Recovery, and I literally felt God say to me, "This is for you." And it was where my faith and my recovery, boom, came together. It was when I was a single dad, and I started in earnest in Celebrate Recovery at that point. I became a leader there, small group leader. I became what they call the assimilator coach. We're calling it the ambassador coach now, promoting it. And then I think it was 2009, I met a man that came out of North Carolina, had been imprisoned. He had been incarcerated in North Carolina. He came here and he started attending. I met him in small group one night, and he was just a great guy, and we became friends. I became his sponsor, and he wanted to figure out a way he could go back into the prison, and because he had had people come in to talk to him when he was incarcerated. He wanted to be able to do the same thing. So we started checking into it, and he found out, well, he couldn't do it because he was too fresh out of prison. But that's where God called me into the inside ministry. So in 2010, I was named the Oregon Celebrate Recovery Inside Rep, and I started putting together relationships with chaplains, putting together relationships with volunteers who I felt were qualified to take Celebrate Recovery into prisons and jails. And 2016, I was given oversight over the Northwest for the inside ministry, so I became the lead for the Northwest, and it was a wonderful ministry. I loved it. But God called me out of that in February of this last year, 2024. He called me out of that, and I stepped down as from the inside ministry, and I applied to be a CR rep. And so now today I'm a Celebrate Recovery rep, and I'm really having a good time trying to get new CR started out here in the community and overseeing and helping, coming alongside leaders of Celebrate Recoveries that are up and running and helping them hopefully do a better job encouraging them and stuff. So
Yeah. Well, what an amazing story. So, let's go back to so you're standing out in front of the crack house and the drug dealer's got his gun on your head. If he had shot you then, if he had killed you, would you have gone to heaven? Do you feel like that you were,
yeah.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
so you felt like that sometime in your youth that you accepted Christ as your savior, but you just hadn't given him your entire will, your life. Would that be an accurate
Exactly.
statement?
That's absolute accurate. I'd already committed my life. I'd accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. Like I say, I think as a young boy, but for sure, when I was 11 years old, I officially, made the statement
Right.
in
But you
front
just,
of my pastor and everything. But no, and I always pray. I was a good prayer. I was, I was always praying. Let me tell you,
yeah,
that was one of the things that I don't think there was hardly a night I'd go to bed I didn't say my prayers for
yeah,
my family, for myself, and yeah.
yeah,
Anyway, but no, I never wanted to do it his way.
right.
I wanted to do things my way. God allowed me to experience the things that I've experienced, to really fall to the depths that I fell, to hurt myself, to hurt others, to go through all the things that I went through. He allowed that to happen so that I could, in the end, truly see that he was the only solution. When I was in that treatment center, I was at the crossroads. I was at the crossroads. It was either, can't you keep going the same way you're going, and it's not going to be, I'm kind of like, I'm going to lift my hand from you, and you're gonna pay the price for living the way you do. I'm not going to save you anymore, or you can choose to go my way, and I'll take care of you.
Yeah,
And I chose to go his way. From Ephesians 2:10, and I always end my testimony with this: For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. I think that what we do in recovery is just, really get ourselves in a place where God can really use us, and where God can direct us into what he has put together beforehand for us. And I think we're partners with him. He loves us that much. He loves us that much that he wants us to experience becoming who we are. We are created in his image, and he wants us to experience going through all the things we go through in life to end up being who he knows beforehand who we're going to end up being.
I love hearing life change stories because you mentioned how you were before, and you're like, I wasn't a nice person, and I made these choices and took advantage of my parents, took advantage of these people, and did these things. But then at some point there in 1983, things started to turn. You were at the bottom, and you said, something has to change. So if someone is in that spot and they're like, I've tried everything else,
Right.
Is change possible? Would you agree with that? Is change
Oh,
possible?
absolutely. Absolutely. I've been clean and sober for over 41 years. And like I said earlier, I'm a guy that I was high every day and I was doing dumb stuff, dumber and dumber stuff. And yeah, change is possible. That's the whole deal.
Hey, do you need change in your life? Jesus Christ can change your life as you surrender every area to Him. However, if nothing changes, nothing changes. See you next time.